everybody. We're going to get started. So let me click on this. So if you have any questions, make sure to get on the Slack channel. And of course, thank you to all of our sponsors for being here. So I'm Martine Dowden. We're going to talk about accessibility today, and we're going to look at some of the easy things that we can do to make that easier. I currently run my own startup. We have a couple fun projects we're working on right now, with our flagship being FlexiPark. But I generally do UX feedback. I usually do UX and UI design and development. All right, so what is accessibility? Basically, it's using the, looking at making things so that assistive technologies like screen readers can actually get access to the content, so that people who, so that everybody can actually get access to the content. So we often think about screen readers, but it's also things like the closed captionings on videos. It's things like color contrast. So there's a slew of things that go behind it. And once you start looking at it in detail, it can get quite complex quite quickly, and there's a lot to it. So what I'm going to do today is we're going to walk through kind of the basics of how to get started, some really simple HTML things without having to go into any of the special ARIA code to look at it. Kind of a quick side note, there's kind of two sides to accessibility. There's the WCAG side, which is the standards set by the W3, which kind of tell you like how to implement basically accessibility. And then there's the 508 compliance side, which is part of the Disabilities Act, which is kind of your legal aspect of it, and that basically states that your media needs to be accessible to everybody, and including digital. So as much that act also covers things like Braille and handicap ramps, those sorts of things, but it's got an entire section for digital media. So there's kind of the two sides. We're going to stick to the WCAG side because it's the implementation, and as much as 508 up until recently had kind of its own set of standards, they're working towards going and aligning themselves with WCAG. So that's why we're going to concentrate on that side today. So let's dive right into it, right? So the first thing is, when you're thinking screen readers, they're speaking to you. They kind of need to know what language to speak to you in. So the easiest way to do that is on your HTML tag is to go ahead and put a language indicator, and that will tell the screen readers what language you're in. The thing to remember with that one is if you're dealing with an application where you're changing the language for any reason, so if it's got maybe a dual English and Spanish version, to go ahead and make sure that's dynamically set based on the language that is being displayed to your user at that time. So super simple, right? The next thing, once you're getting into an application, is how you're going to navigate it, right? And so the way screen readers use to navigate an app, of course, you're going to be able to get access to normal navigation the same way you do if you were looking at it. But also, they're going to look at how your content is sectioned, and they're going to be able to use that to give context to the users as to where they are, how to get through it, and how to jump between sections, because they maybe don't want to see that header part 100 times over or listen to that nav part 100 times over. They've already heard it. They want to go directly to the meat of the content. Now, the really cool thing is HTML5 gives us tags that tells us all of this out of the box. So we don't actually have to do anything special other than to go ahead and use these tags. So for example, here's a handful of them. You can use header, nav, we've seen a lot, but there's a lot more than just the nav tag. There's footer, there's article, section, aside, and so on and so forth. So make sure you're looking at those, and when appropriate, use those, because what that does is that tells your users and your screen readers. And also, by the same token, things like your series, your Cortanas, and all those types of technologies as well, what the content of your page looks like. So it helps those as well. So when you're getting into the IoT side and the text-to-speech side of things, it's not just screen readers. It also affects those types of systems as well. If you're dealing with a legacy application and you can't afford to go changing all of the code everywhere, there's, I mentioned a little bit ARIA. ARIA is kind of the markup for accessibility, if you will. And what it does is it allows us to give context to things in a different way. So over here on the side, I've had the ARIA equivalent of what you would have in there. Where you have, you can have your banner, your navigation. So what you would give is that section would end up getting a role. And it does exactly that. It describes what that role is. And these are not randomly, like these aren't user generated. There's a set list of them that have a specific context. Header tags. So header tags do as much as visually speaking, when you take them out of the box, from a CSS perspective, they kind of give different sizes to text. Well, they do a lot more than that behind the scenes. So if you have a page that has no header tags whatsoever, this is what kind of the content looks like to the user. You cannot tell the hierarchy of what's going on. If you go ahead and add properly placed header tags, then all of a sudden now, even from a screen reader perspective, you're getting what the hierarchy of that content looks like, and you can tell what your titles or subtitles and so on and so forth, which whether you're doing it from a code standpoint or from a visual standpoint, giving that hierarchy and that structure to your users is going to be helpful either way, so totally worth doing. And the only gotcha with that to remember is when you're going down, you want to make sure to do 1, then 2, then 3, and not skip any on the way down. If you need to restyle it for whatever reason, use your CSS. That's what it's there for. But don't skip numbers going down. Going back up, you can. That's not a problem. But make sure as you're going down those levels that hierarchy stays in direct order, because some of the technologies can get confused otherwise. And it doesn't make as much sense. Tables can get quite complex quite quickly. The big thing to remember about tables is make sure you have THs. So the THs are going to be your headers, right? And make sure those header tags exist. So I have a quick little example where you have not only headers on top of your columns, but also headers on the side. That's a table, for example, that can get quite difficult to understand if you got to imagine that you're not actually visually seeing this table if you're in a screen reader situation, right? That you somehow need that described to you and still need to be able to navigate it. So an easy way to help with that is to go ahead and make sure that your header tags are actually TH and not TD, and to go ahead and give them a scope. So what scope does is it tells it, is this header going to be a header for the row or for the column? So over here you can see I have scope column for this present versus absent, because this header is giving information for this column. This header, this absent, has a scope column as well because it's getting direction for this column. And then this Sam and Maxime both have a scope of row because now they're headers for these rows. So simply doing that tells the assistive technologies which direction that header is for and exactly what that header is headering, if that makes any sense. Also, you can use a summary and a caption. Caption will give you what's in the table, so it allows the user to get an overview of what data is being presented. As a sighted person, when you're looking at the table, what happens is you can look at it at a glance, kind of get an idea of what's in there, without ever having to really read the table, if that makes sense. In a screen reader situation, you don't have that luxury, so you need to have something to tell you what that at a glance is. And then you can also use the summary. The summary is there and is not displayed. So this caption is actually displayed right here. This summary would not be displayed. It's just behind the scenes, and that would be there to help users understand how to navigate it. So if you have a particularly complex table, giving an idea of what the data structure looks like to the user is what the summary is used for. Right. This is one of my biggest pet peeves personally, and so I tell my developers, links are links, buttons are buttons, divs and spans are neither. So how many of you have ever coded in Angular or React? How easy is it to put that on-click on just about anything? That div, that span, that link, it doesn't matter, right? That's a huge problem for accessibility as a whole. Links and buttons, HTML links and buttons behind the scenes have a slew of things that is there that we don't ever have to think about, but is there behind the scenes such as it automatically takes focus, and then it has certain states and values that are there behind the scenes that the assistive technologies use, that if we go ahead and put that on, click on a div, now we need to, in ARIA, recode all that stuff. And we don't want to do that. That's a pain in the butt. That's a whole lot of code. And that's a whole lot of complexity we don't have to do if we simply use a button for an action and a link to navigate. So that's the big difference, right? If you're going somewhere, we need to be using links. If you're doing an action, we need to be doing using a button, and you can style them however you want to style them. Just make sure that you're using the appropriate one for the appropriate action. The other thing to do is to make sure that what that button does is clear, because as much as sometimes you can have a visual context, once you get into the screen reader world, there is no visual context. So making sure that that button has some kind of idea of what they're clicking for. Click me is not a good enough, as you think you're tabbing through your stuff, you're clicking through, you're just hearing what the buttons and the links say. Click me doesn't tell the user anything. So making sure that those button labels have enough, and those link labels have enough context of where you're going, right? So how to choose if you need a button or a link? Well, first off, if it's clickable, it's not a div, it's not a span, it needs to be a button or a link, right? The second part is, if you're going somewhere, so are you trying to navigate somewhere? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, then what happens is then you need an anchor tag. If the answer is no, then you're gonna go for, it's obviously an action, then you're gonna go for the button. Super simple. So I mentioned a little bit in terms of making sure that your links and your buttons both have context. So because the users may not know where that button is going if they don't have a visual idea of what's going on. So the two big situations where that's seen a lot are going to be icons. We use a lot more icons than maybe a couple years ago in our designs these days. So making sure those icons have some idea of what's going on with them, right? So maybe, this is a link that jumps to a different section, making sure that that information is conveyed somehow to the user. So it can be as simple as, because even for normal sighted users that don't have any problems figuring, that aren't using like a screen reader, still knowing where that button's going is important, right? So either you put it on there or you can use a title tag. There's all sorts of ways of doing it, but making sure that there's some kind of context for where it's going. The other situation where you see that a lot is on a read more, because think about tabbing through links on a page or tabbing through buttons on a page. Read more doesn't tell the user anything. So again, I mentioned a title tag, or you can use a title tag or an ARIA label tag that will give some extra information to the user as to where it's going. Focus. So focus, I mentioned tabbing through things a lot, quite often at this point. Right now I'm gonna tab through these buttons, and as you can see no, it's not showing it at the bottom of the page. As you can see, I'm tabbing through this stuff, and as much as you can see right now, I'm focused over here, right? After that, the focus goes, you can't tell where I'm at. Oh, now I'm at the bottom of the page. But these buttons, as much as right now I have a hover on them, you never saw me tab through. Right? And they are very much part of it. And I know it's super tiny, but it's showing up for you. As you can see, on the blue part, right, it's showing that I'm actually on buttons, but you have no idea because there's no way of hovering it. So what we would want to see is, now as I'm tabbing through it this time, you can see where I'm at super easily, the same way as the way I was doing it on the hover before. And that's a really super easy fix. Whenever you have a hover, you go ahead and add a focus. That's the only thing you need to do, and then all of your tab throughs will be able to work that way. A lot of browsers, Chrome was one of the first ones to do it, have started putting that big blue box around things so that now there's a little bit of automation behind the focus issue. A lot of designers love to squash that because it's kind of unsightly. So make sure that if you do squash that, that you have some kind of replacement so that you can tell as you're tabbing through links and buttons where your cursor is and where your focus is. Any questions so far? Do you have anything? Yep.
One question. What are your thoughts on styling JavaScript helpers like Bootstrap? They do a lot of styling information already.
So the question was, what is my thoughts on JavaScript stylers like Bootstrap, because they do a lot of it for us already. In terms of CSS libraries, Bootstrap included, a lot of them have information behind them on how to make it accessible. So Material is one. Foundation, some portions of it have accessibility features in it. And Bootstrap, I believe, at this point has done a lot to do support for it. So making sure that whatever library you use actually has support for it and and a lot of times what they'll do is they'll have notes on how to make sure it is accessible and then to go ahead and follow it. So for example, I'm going to use Material because that's the one I'm the most familiar with and have worked with the most recently. And I don't have internet, never mind. But if you go to, for example, the Material version, and I know that documentation, so I'll mention that one, but at the very bottom of each component page, it'll have a little tidbit on how to make it accessible. They'll oftentimes say, hey, make sure you're doing X, Y, Z, and maybe you need to label this or whatever. But making sure that those are, that it's a library that supports it, and because there's a fair amount of work that goes into supporting it, if it does, they'll tell you in the documentation. If they don't mention it, they're probably not. Any other questions? Okay. Any questions in here? Okay. So, and this continues a little bit with the library. Color contrast is an issue. And so making sure if you do restyle a theme for a specific library that you're watching your color contrasts. So color contrast, the main reason for paying attention to it is one, if you're too light, as a general rule, you're going to have most people are going to have issues seeing it. And then once you're looking at issues with screen quality, glares, anybody with any kind of, and I'm talking even slight diminished visual abilities, so even people that otherwise wouldn't wear glasses, just aren't 20/20, would start having issues. You're going to need that color contrast to be boosted. The other reason is if you have color blindness, for example, one of the most common ones is red-green. What happens is if you have enough contrast between your foreground and your background, and you still have, for example, green background and red text, if that contrast is wide enough, even if you can't see either color, there's enough black and white in each of the colors that that information can still be seen. So there has been a calculation that shows that 4.5 to 1 was kind of what they settled for AA standard. So, let me back up with the AA, AAA. WCAG has 3 levels of accessibility standards. AA, which is kind of your basic of the basic stuff, and then there's AA, which is kind of one step up of more things you need to do. That's kind of where if you end up on a project that needs to be accessible, that's generally where they want, what the standards they want to be followed at. And then AAA is going to be you're developing for a community that is going to be using assistive technologies in some fashion. So those rules are a lot more, as you can tell even from the contrast ratios here, the rules are a lot more stringent on AAA. But most people are going to, and most projects are going to have a requirement of AA. And so for that standards, what they figured out is that the average person can read and can understand data when the contrast ratio is 4.5 to 1. So what they do is they look at the luminosity of the color to the background of the color. There's a bunch of fancy schmancy math behind that. You can find it on Wikipedia. I did it once just for fun. It's not that fun. But the point is, there's checkers now, and I'm going to show you some of those right now. on how to do that. So as you can see, this is definitely not 4.5 to 1 up here. It's actually 1 point, oh, I put a cheat note, haha. But so one of the tools I often use is Axe. And so what that does is it will allow to check the entire page. No, I need my, there we go. For issues. So it's all of the tools I'm going to show you today are Chrome plugins. I primarily use Chrome. I know many of them do exist for Firefox. Most of them I don't think exist for IE or Edge. This one, Axe, has a downloadable version, and I am told, although I haven't tried yet, that you can actually build that one into your build and deployment processes if you wanted to automate accessibility testing as part of your build process. I've not tried, but I'm told that you can do it, so that'd be really cool. If somebody ever can confirm that, I'd be entirely grateful. But so what you do is you basically run this tool. It'll analyze the entire page, and it will tell you where your issues are. This is a little small, but basically right now it's telling me I have 2 elements with insufficient contrast. Surprise, surprise. I'm showing them on the screen. But what that does is it allows you to work through what the errors that it wants. It'll show you which parts of the code have errors and tell you, hey, go fix them. The other nice part about it is you'll have a little bit of description on how to solve the issue. Beware with that, because sometimes it'll send you down the wrong rabbit hole, especially if you're using not just standard HTML, CSS. I know, for example, recently we've been working on a GWT project, which a lot of the HTML is being generated, and a lot of times those how to fix kind of solutions aren't working for us very well. So just be smarter than your tool. The other option for tools, now when I show tools, don't try to run 2 at the same time. They will crash your browser. They do not play nice. So make sure you're killing one before you start the other. The other one I like to use is Wave, simply because Wave is very, very visual and allows you, for example, to remove all CSS to see what your content structure is. So the advantage of that is that you can see exactly what the order of your HTML is. It also will tell you what your contrast issues are, tell you where your errors are, and highlight them for you so you can see exactly where they are. The other cool thing with that, especially if you're dealing with a code base you're not exactly familiar with, it'll show you at the bottom. There's a little code drawer you can open, and it'll show you exactly where your error is in terms of the code. The cool one with that is if you're ever needing to show maybe management or a boss or whatever how bad a particular page is, or that we really, you really need to spend some time on it, it puts nice little red boxes on all of your errors. So it's a very visually compelling tool in that sense. So anyway, back to colors and color contrast ratios. The super easy way to fix that is to go ahead and find a tool, for example, similar to Wave. You put in your color, it tells you miserable failure, and then you can go ahead and adjust until you find one that will actually pass. And then, a lot of them will have some dynamic ability or give you suggestion on what's the closest color in the same hue that will go ahead and pass that color. If you're using SAS or less, lighten and darken are really good for helping with that. Let's go ahead and close that. Yeah, the easiest way to close Wave is just to refresh. Side note while I'm on tools, the other fun one, if you're trying to get kind of the experience of what it's like to have a particular disability, or is this tool called Funkify. It's really awesome because it's a simulator. So for example, while we're on color and we were talking about color contrast, I'm going to go for color Carl. And now this would be like 100% color blindness versus this would be somebody that has some green color blindness. Go ahead and start that one. Uh-oh. Hey, you can see what it's like to have a peripheral vision. No, that's not what we were going for. There you go. Green. This is a very red heavy design. There's not. I mean, it's a very deep purple, so a lot of these aren't showing up very, very well. But as you can see, the different versions of color blindness, you can do some simulation on that. Any questions on tools?
You can use Axe Core with Selenium, Mocha, etc.
So Slack says that we can use Axe Core on Selenium, Mocha. There was a third one?
Jasmine.
And Jasmine. So awesome. Sweet.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I have light in my face, so I literally can't see you.
Two questions.
Yes.
Number one, is the top transmitter against background always be that we should or is it needs to? And number two, I work on a web application where we have a very dark background and dark blue, and we're having a conflict between accessibility and marketing. Consumers just want to stop using a darker background altogether. They don't like the footnotes and stuff like that, or certain items.
So the first question was, is the color contrast always to the background? Yes. It's always going to be the color directly behind it, which also means that if you have a pattern or a photo behind any kind of text, you need to make sure that you're checking the darkest and the lightest of whatever is behind it. So, but it's always going to be to what's directly behind that text. The second question was that they're having an issue with their marketing team. They have an application with a very dark background currently, and there's the eternal debate between brand colors and accessibility going on, which is actually a very common issue. And the answer to that is what's always worked for me, I mean, depending on your team and depending on the company that you work on, is to go ahead and make a proposal with same hue, just slightly different variations on how much white or how much black, depending on if it needs darkened or lightened on either the text color or the background color, depending on the situation. And saying, okay, this is the closest thing that we can do, still following your brand colors within the same hue, so you're still in the same spectrum and everything, but is going to go ahead and pass the accessibility side of the equation. And sometimes it's just a need for educating the marketing department on why the need for accessibility and why it's so important. That can often go a long way as well. Any other questions? Okay.
How do you suggest working with designers when they create a workflow that does not follow accessibility guidelines, nested navigation, clickable things that don't allow behavior in a standard way?
So the question was, how do you work with the with the design department when they're building flows that don't follow accessibility guidelines in terms of clickable things and the such. So a lot of times, maybe during the design session, seeing if you can have your accessibility person or somebody that is if everybody on your team does accessibility in the development process, maybe be part of some of those conversations to help steer that discussion. And then back to general education, not only understanding what the major pitfalls are, what the need for it is, and also I find that the use of SVGs can sometimes solve some of those issues. I've seen a lot of conflict going back and forth in terms of, especially when looking at very visual pages with infographics and those sorts of things. SVGs have the ability to have clickable things and actual text, so you're not dealing with random clickable images that do all sorts of things. So that's also an option. But a lot of times it's going to come down to collaboration and education, unfortunately. There's no magic wand answer that can solve some of that.
As another way of making a compelling case for stakeholders, do you have any litigation brought against entities that build non-accessible sites or products?
The question was asking about litigation brought towards non-accessible sites and products in order to make a compelling case to stakeholders. Absolutely. There is a website out there that shows, and just Google accessibility litigation and I think the last time I think it was updated was 2015, so it's been a couple years, but had a list of a slew of companies, including Social Security, Toys R Us, eHarmony, bunches of local municipalities and communities. I mean, the range of Nike, I think, was on that list as well, of companies, anyway from your small municipality, town, council website, all the way to your big corporate giants, and losing those websites on the base of, losing those litigation for not being accessible is actually really, really wide and really, really huge. And it does happen, and they do lose. And usually what happens is the litigation is on grounds of discrimination, saying that the entity who needs assistive technology and is not able to access the content is being discriminated against. And since disabilities is a protected class, they end up losing. Okay, anything in here? No? Okay. So forms. So we talked forms. This right here is what it looks like if labels are not properly associated with their inputs once you get on the screen reader. You have no clue what the form is for. You have no clue what the inputs is for. Good luck. Fill it out. Have fun. Not really. So what we want to do is, even to a screen reader, we want to be able to have all that context information as well. Not only is context important regardless of your user, but on top of it, it's also important in terms of making sure the screen reader understands where it is. So the easiest way to do that is to go ahead and have your input nested inside your label. That's option number one. Super easy, super simple. The other option, especially if you're using Bootstrap, where that creates a whole slew of funny, funky things, is to go ahead and give all of your inputs IDs, and to go ahead and do a for, and that will associate the two and make sure that now your label and your input are actually linked together. You can get by without a label in very specific use cases if you have sufficient context to know what those input fields are supposed to be. You can get by with only using a title. So for example, phone numbers, right? If you have it split up in 3 boxes where you have your area code, your first 3 digits, or your last 4 digits, anybody can figure out that, okay, a phone number with 3 boxes is going to kind of have the phone numbers put up. As long as you're giving a title for what values are expected, so name and title, you should be good to go. So there's a few, if there's enough context and the context is strong enough to tell you what's going on, then you can go ahead and get by without the label. But as a general rule, you need a label. Also worth considering is placement of your label. So when you go ahead and put your form together, you need to make sure that your label and your input field are close enough together that they can be easily visually associated. Because, for example, so I'm going to pull up that Funkify tool I had up earlier, and I'm going to go for somebody with tunnel vision. If you have tunnel vision issues and you're trying to navigate a site, you want to be able to find, okay, now I found my label, okay, I can start typing, I'm okay, right? But if your label and your input are too far apart, it's going to be very, very difficult to be able to figure out what needs to be associated with what. So making sure that your labels and your inputs are close together is going to be really important. Also, more and more, the suggestion is to actually put my submit button over here on the left side and to have everything left to line, so that, again, somebody with a tunnel vision is going to be able to just follow down their form and not have to guess, is there something over here out in the ether to go find. They can just follow straight down the form and go ahead and be good to go. On the flip side, it's also making sure that, again, as we talked about tabbing through earlier and focus, that applies to forms just as much. So making sure that all of those input fields can be tabbed through. And that not only that, but they can be tabbed through in the correct order, right? So that you're not tabbing through, especially if you have a 2-column layout or something like that, making sure that tab through order makes sense. Generally speaking, you're going to want to be top left to bottom right, at least for English-speaking American websites. Be sure that you're being where it's, a lot of what I'm talking about today in terms of left to right and positioning is for languages written from left to right. As soon as you have languages written in other directions, whether it's top, bottom, or right, left, some of those rules change, so make sure you're being culturally specific on that. Before languages written from left to right, making sure that your order is going top left to bottom right in your tab order. Any questions on forms? Yes, no? All right. Yep.
If you have a complex form that's divided into sections, what's the best way to get the screen reader to read out those sections?
So the question was, if you have a complex form divided out into sections, what's the best way to divvy those out into sections? You can use header tags inside your form. So you can totally have a form title with a header tag of, I don't know, my form, and then have so your H1 or H2 may be my form, and your H3 may be, section 1, H4, next H3, your stuff, then H3, section 2, and so on and so forth. With extremely complex form, I would highly recommend, though, and that's more of a UX thing than an accessibility thing, is breaking it up maybe into multiple pages with a stepper or some kind of, this is how far along you are in your form. And that depends on your audience as well a little bit. If you're dealing with power users or not, there's a bunch of considerations there. But the short answer is header tag. I'm sorry? Can we use a field set as well? Yes, you can group elements using field set, but make sure you have a legend. That way it determines, hey, what is in that set. What do you do if you have a paper form, then you put it online and you take it into Acrobat? I'm not very familiar with Acrobat, but PDF, so I do know that you can make a PDF accessible. So there are, Acrobat Pro has an accessibility tab, and they do have some documentation. So I would highly recommend going and checking that out, but I'm not familiar enough to speak on how easy or how difficult or how bad of an idea or good of an idea that is. All right. Yes? Yes. So you want to make sure that that top left to bottom right is true no matter what your layout is going to be. So when you're, as you collapse or as you get wider or shorter, making sure that you're still following that order. The other thing with responsive is making sure that your input fields are going to be wide enough for touch. And as much as once upon a time the old adage was, anything on screen is going to be mouse, anything on phone is going to be touch or tablet. Thank you, Lenovo, but that's no longer true. Now we have touch screens on just about everything. So making sure that your input fields, regardless at this point, are going to be wide enough for basically a finger, and the answer on that is about 46 pixels is about the average adult finger size. So making sure that you have that wide enough, and the other half of it is making sure that your text is also wide enough and scaling with the viewport. So making sure that you have that meta tag at the beginning of your HTML for the viewport side. It's so that you're shrinking appropriately with the device and not just getting to that. You load up a website on your phone and the font is like, looks like 1 millimeter high. So you're not getting that happening to your site. We're doing good. Okay. All right, so that's kind of it for forms. Let's move on. Alt text. That should be one that I'm hoping is starting to hit popular knowledge and general good coding practices. Unfortunately, it's still very much an error that you see often. Yeah, go ahead and put alt text on your stuff. The thing about alt text is that you really want it to be descriptive as to what is in the image. It's not just oh, it's a set of stairs, or oh, it's a boat, right? You really have to think, if you cannot see this image, is my user really getting the full what is in this image and what is relevant to the context of what's going on? If it's an image that's just there for, a background or to make it, quote, pretty, or whatever the case might be, but it does not have any content relevance, you can put an empty alt tag. You can also give it a role presentation. Don't do both. Do one or the other. The empty alt tag pretty much tells the screen reader that they're going to ignore it, that it's there for, that it does not have any contextual relevance. The thing is, if you do not put anything there, then it's just a missing alt tag. The screen reader is going to say, hey, there's an image. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but there's an image. So make sure that you have alt tags to really explain what is in the image and make sure that that content is relevant. Alt tags for SVGs, if you are using an SVG as an image, in an image tag, you will need an alt tag. If you're embedding that SVG directly as code in your HTML, then you don't need an alt tag because at that point it's code, it's no longer an image. You'll need a slew of other things to make it accessible, but not an alt tag. Any questions on images? Okay. All right. Animations. Animations are fun. We love them. They can also make people seasick. So let's go ahead and make this stop for a minute. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see it. Okay. So animations, we love to use them. They're really awesome. We use them for transitions. We use them for micro animations. We also use them because they look fun and they look cool, either as a, you get on the nice splash screen and you've got all the movie things moving in the background and it looks all super awesomely cool. And if you get somebody with vertigo, they're going to barf. So the way we handle that is there's several considerations with animations. Anything less than 3 seconds, you generally don't have to worry about because it's short enough that it's not a problem. If you get past that 3 seconds, or if it involves content, then we get into having to consider things. If it's longer than 3 seconds, rule of thumb is it needs to be able to get paused. So you have to be able to say, okay, I'm done with this right now, and pause it. If there's content involved, then the user needs to be able to control the speed at which they receive said content. And there's multiple reasons for that. One, if you have, for example, like the example I have over here, where it's a carousel of things running through and you can have anything in there, articles, pictures, whatever. But the point is, you want to be able to give your user time to understand that information. If you have somebody with tunnel vision, it's going to take them longer to process through the entire bit of content than somebody who doesn't. If you have somebody who, again, has peripheral vision only, such as in macular degeneration, same idea, right? It's going to take them longer to process that information. So there's the visual aspect. There's this is going to make me barf aspect of something continuous, so the vertigo side of it. And then there's the cognitive side of it. Some people just take longer to process information for whatever reason, either age, either some kind of cognitive reason, medical reason, whatever the case might be. It's going to take them longer to process the information, so you want to give them an appropriate amount of time, as determined by them, to understand and read that information. So there's a slew of regulations on exactly how much, if you still want to do an auto cycling through, what those rules should be in terms of the speed, letting the user increment or decrement the speed. The other option, much simpler, a lot less rules, is just let them click through it themselves, which is generally the option I recommend because, again, much simpler. So simply adding the ability to click through it yourself at your own speed, at your own rate, and pause it goes ahead and makes it accessible. Yes? Yes? There was a question about the 3 seconds and where that comes from and if it's biologically related. I'm not sure how they came up with it. I do know that in terms of the color contrast and some of the other regulations that the WCAG has in their set, that they are research and biologically related, so it would not surprise me that that was where that came from. I just don't know off the top of my head. I'm sorry. Okay. Animation. Yes. So yes, step through it your own self. And being able to pause it. That's something else I was going to say with it, but I don't remember. Oh yes. The other rule of thumb with animations is, especially like a slider or something, if you do have an autoplay, defaulting it to off rather than on, and letting people choose that they want to see the autoplay. That's not, I don't think that's been set as a default rule for sure. That I think that generally autoplay is okay, but it's definitely a preference to go ahead and default it to off and let people autoplay if they want to rather than the other way around. Okay, tools. We talked about a load of tools. I'm going to go over them really, really quickly again. This is really, really, really small. Tools. Okay. Accessibility Developer Tools by Google. So I showed you guys Axe. The Chrome tools, there's also one called Lighthouse, which actually runs Axe under the cover. I need internet to show it. Internet's being evil, so I can't show it. But basically what it does is it takes Axe, and that report that I was showing where you could just click through the information, well, it actually spits out a report generated with a list of issues. So that has the market advantage of being able to have a nice little report, nice little can that you can print off, file away, or prove that you're 100% good to go, right? But it does run Axe under the covers. We showed Wave, which is really cool. Wave also has a website you can go to and type in a URL, which is also kind of cool in order to be able to spot check a specific page. Funkify, which is the simulation tool that I just showed. And if you go to the WCAG website, just type in WCAG, and they'll be able to find it. There is actually a page with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tools listed. Every slew and flavor, plugins, you name it. So anywhere from free to hundreds of dollars, whatever the case may be. But there's a tool. These are just the ones that I showed in this particular presentation. Also on tooling, I highly recommend if you're doing accessibility and that's really something that you're becoming passionate about, that you are, go ahead and start playing with screen readers. They are counterintuitive in a lot of ways in terms of keyboard shortcuts if they're not something that you are used to. So do go through the tutorial. You'll thank me later for that. And it's one of those things that you really have to play with in order to learn how to use. But testing and understanding what that looks like and what that feels like really shows something that I can't just show in this 1-hour presentation. So unless anybody has any questions, that's all I have for you today. This is actually on, side note, it's not all I have for you today. This website that I used to do this demonstration is actually on GitHub. So if you look for me up on GitHub, it's called, even though I showed 11, I lied. It's 10, it's accessibility 10 easy recipes. And so it is under my name, Martine Dowden, on GitHub.
Here's a question from Slack.
Yes?
Regarding images, is there any accessibility usefulness to figure and FHC's option?
The what? Is there any useful figure and fig caption? Okay, I have not used figure recently. I do know that it is not, there are cross-browser compatibility issues with figure, or at least there is with older browsers. So if you have to support older browsers, make sure you're keeping tab on that. Fig caption is fine. Doing caption actually with images, if you do a caption for your images, you do not need the alt tag. So there is a corner case with images if there's enough content in, so say you have an image being an inline style, right? So you have a sentence, you put the image, and then maybe the next sentence is a descriptor of said image, which would be the same thing that you would have put in the alt text. That is a situation in which it is acceptable not to have the alt text because the text itself that is already there present for all viewers is describing the image. On the other, and so anytime you have a caption, those sorts of things where you have visually present or within its context enough information that it would be the same information that would have been in an alt text, you can get by without them. So yes.
Are parallax animations accessible? Can they be made accessible?
Parallax animations, keep them under 3 seconds, and that counts for loaders. That counts for loaders. So if you're worried about the spinners on your applications when they're loading, so if you're making sure that those can be paused as well, if you expect your application to take more than 3 seconds to load. That's all. Well, thank you very much.